بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, Alhamdulillah, we praise Allah in salutations on our beloved Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. This evening, my beloved brothers and sisters, we start the summary of the fiqh rules of Ramadan. And 2 weeks ago, we shared, in fact, the framing verses of the Quran, from which the fuqaha, the jurists, extract the rulings. And just to refresh our memory, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to us, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. That fasting, with reference to Ramadan, is wajib, it is maktub, it is mandated, it is obligatory upon us, like it had been obligated upon those who preceded us, so that we may obtain taqwa. And then in the ayah that follows that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts mentioning some of the rules, that it's ayyaman ma'adudat, that your days of Ramadan are calculated, they are specific days. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the categories of those. So if we reflect on the verses, in the previous ayah, Allah says it is wajib. So that is the introduction. Your fasting is wajib. Then in the ayah that follows that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now mentions the exceptions to those, the exceptions to the obligation. And Allah mentions, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةُ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions those who are exempted from this, and I will refer to it very briefly inshallah this evening. So let's start off with how the fuqaha classically look at the laws of Ramadan, upon whom is the month of Ramadan wajib. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allocates the obligation in the Quran, and our beloved Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in multiple teachings highlight, so who has to fast? The first requirement is the person who is Muslim. The second, it is the person who has obtained bulugh, the person who has obtained puberty. The third condition is that the person must be sane or have the ruling of sanity, right? So when we say someone is sane, we understand that they have the ruling of sanity. I'm mentioning this because if the ruling of insanity applies, then of course this obligation is lifted. And the person must have the ability to fast, the capacity. The person must qualify in fiqh to fast. There are a few very interesting points that I just want to expand on when it comes to who has to fast. The common question I think that many parents often deliberate on is, should a child fast? You know, and sometimes parents will come to me and they'll say, Sheikh, you know, my child is X amount of years old. Should I introduce fasting at this age? So let's quickly go to the nusus shari'iyya. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it is wajib. We understand from fiqh that it is on a technicality wajib from the point of bulugh. But like many other practices in fiqh, we teach children. They are nurtured into a particular practice. So it is encouraged for us to teach children from a young age to fast. But when we look at the teachings in fiqh, we find that once the child reaches the age of 7, the child must be taught and encouraged to firmly fast a whole day. So from the age of 7, that would not be the best time to introduce, a quarter day or a half a day. Those introductions, some have asked, is there any benefit in teaching a child, okay, you can fast half a day? Yes, there is benefit because you ease them into fasting. But when we look at Islamic teachings, it is best to let the 7-year-old, firmly fast a whole day. And by the time the child reaches 10, the child should be obligated to fast. Now we are saying if the child does not fast by 10, there should be a repercussion, a consequence. In other words, punishment. And we really extract this from the model of Salah, that in the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, you teach a child to perform Salah at 7. And you don't teach a child, okay, Fajr, just make 1 rak'ah. No. You teach the child, there are 2, rak'atain. For Maghrib Salaah, when you're teaching the child at 7, you teach the child 3 rak'at. Dhuhr Salah, 4 rak'at. You don't half the obligation, but you get them into the routine. If the child reaches 10 and the child is not performing Salah, the child is being disobedient, then there should be punishment. They need to understand there is now a direct consequence. But the approach of a parent should be that you reward the child. So to respond to parents that often pose this question each year, teach the child from young already, maybe from 5, or 4. 4 or 5, okay, my child, an hour. If the child's younger, maybe 3 years old, an hour. And then you have a beautiful, iftar after that hour for the child. So they recognize that there is this incentivization. And as the child gets older, you shift. But by the time the child reaches 7, that would be the time for the full day. And if the child has difficulty, as a parent, you can have rahmah. Don't punish at 7. Have rahmah, okay, inshallah. You're now very sick, that headache is really bad, and it's a legitimate headache. Then, okay, give in, and then you say, okay, my child, next day, you try to do the full day. But by 10, definitely the child must be on full day, and there should be punishment if the child is not fasting. Now, avoid from the very beginning punishment. Rather focus on incentivization, that you reward the child. So if the child can get through, maybe the child is 5, and the child's obligation from the parent is half a day every day, and you can reward the child that inshallah on Eid, if you fasted this whole month half a day on Eid, like we get rewarded by Allah on Eid day for fasting and our sacrifices, you say on Eid inshallah there's going to be a beautiful gift for you if you manage to do half a day. And now the child is 7 and you say inshallah the gift is bigger. And of course when the child is 10, the biggest. And when the child is baligh, now you say ask from Allah your reward inshallah. Okay? Another question that often comes up is, should a new revert to Islam fast? And I was reminded by this by a brother who reverted to Islam quite recently. Is the obligation upon a revert to fast with reference to the first month of Ramadan? And the scholars have some discussion around this, but it is agreed upon, based upon the conditions, that if the person is Muslim and the person is adult, they have to fast. So by extension, a revert, to save ourselves from the debate, should fast. However, if the revert faces difficulty to the extent that they become sick, then they take on the ruling of the sick person, meaning they can then break their fast. But the ruling of the sick person would apply. And if that revert is Muslim and they missed any days of fasting because they were sick, of course they have to make up those days in the manner that a sick person would have to do. So we come to the area which Allah explains explicitly or highlights explicitly in the verse. Those who are exempted from fasting, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes reference to 3 categories. The top 3 that those who can see on the slides, the top 3 are the categories that Allah essentially provides. The first is the traveler. The second is the one who is sick. And the third is the person who does not have the ability to fast. With reference to the traveler may forego fasting if the fasting is if the travel is physically challenging, and they will make up their missed fast after Ramadan. Okay? And a very important point regarding the traveler, if you are a traveler and you are accountable for other travelers, so I'm talking about drivers. So sometimes I overheard this conversation. The person said that, they was Ramadan and they didn't want to break their fast. And whilst they were driving, they actually lost concentration. Now that would be inappropriate because you are accountable for the lives of others as the driver. And you are a traveler, so you should rather break your fast because there's accountability for others. And in fact, the fuqaha write about accountability in the section of the pregnant lady. The sick person, again, the sick person should not fast if fasting is going to worsen their sickness. And the best way to get this feedback is from a doctor, if preferable, a Muslim doctor. You go to a Muslim doctor and you ask the Muslim doctor, can I take my medication in the morning and fast and then of course have it at night, or do I need to break my fast? If the doctor says, yes, you need to take it at those specific hours, then you need to take their advice because you are sick and you would not be fasting. And you can revisit your condition daily, right? Now, what some sick people do, and I know this, maybe I was also one of these who I'm describing now. Some sick people, they are sick, but they start the day, I'm going to try. Right? They were told not to fast. May Allah guide all of us. I was one of these people, and I ended up in hospital a few years ago. And it was a Muslim doctor who came to me and said, Sheikh, you should have known better. If you are meant to take your medication and not fast, then follow that instruction. But some sick people, we feel that we want to fast, so we start the day fasting. And we forego the medication or the treatment, and we worsen our state. Now, that is inappropriate. So if a doctor has advised, and that's why we prefer a Muslim doctor, because they understand the sanctity of the month of Ramadan, then rather do not fast. Because Allah had already exempted you in the Quran, the sick person. The third category, and the sick person would make up the missed days after Ramadan. The third category that Allah provides is the person who, if they fast, it will be with great difficulty, meaning that it's a permanent state as well. So here we have those who are unable to fast. The condition doesn't allow them to fast in Ramadan and outside of Ramadan. They won't be able to make it up. So when a person is sick in Ramadan, these are common questions, you evaluate, is your state permanent? Right? Is it a permanent state? If that is the case, then you won't fast and you would automatically pay fidya for every missed day of fasting. So that is the third category, the individual who pays fidya, or essentially you are feeding a poor person, but the system we have in South Africa is that you pay this fidya for each missed day. And so you'll find the fidya amounts are published for every missed day that elderly person would pay. Then just on that point, a common question that the elderly often ask is, what if I don't have the money to pay? Right? Very good question. So the elderly might say, okay, I can't fast because I'm very sickly, it's a permanent state, and now this is the amount. If the elderly person does not legitimately have the money to pay or the capacity to pay, right, then we should preferably try and get the money from family members, preferably. So sometimes elderly contact me and they'll say, I'm a zakah case, I don't have money, I can't fast. These are the amounts. And when the elderly person says that to me and I confirm it, then I often source it and I'll ask, do you have family? Do you have children? Are they working? Okay, the children can pay that amount. If no children, no family members, then I would often source it from someone who is able to, contribute it. And then we sort the payment out in that manner. The fourth category, a really common area, not the fourth category, the fourth area or the fourth individual, is the pregnant or breastfeeding lady. And this is with reference to the lady who is hamil, irrespective of the stage of the pregnancy, or the lady who had given birth and is breastfeeding, right? And so this is based again on a number of areas. Firstly, that person must get clarity from the lady must get clarity from a medical practitioner, a doctor. The doctor must state, you may not fast in this state. Or you are breastfeeding, you may not fast. Firstly, that is required as a prerequisite. Secondly, to summarize the discussion amongst the ulama place the lady in between category 2 and 3. Either the sick person or the person who does not have the capacity to fast. And that is why the ruling that is granted to the pregnant lady or the breastfeeding lady who does not fast, and there are three rulings. She either must fast her missed days, that's one madhab, or she must pay fidya, that's the second madhab. And the consolidated view, and it's the preferred view, is that she'll fast the missed days and pay fidya. So this is the preponderant position, that she should fast the missed days and pay the fidya. Okay. Another important point as we come to the end, this is my final slide, is when should that missed fasting be made up, And so an elderly, a lady told me when I mentioned a few weeks ago that it is Rajab, she was reminded that she has skulked, she has to pay in the days. And so people often delay the fasting, those who owe days. So what's the ruling? If you missed fasting and you owe it, you must fast those days before the coming of the new Ramadan, right? So Ramadan concludes, you owe X amount of days, men or women, you should fast them as soon as possible. So sometimes there's this conversation, this discussion, it's the month of Shawwal, it is recommended that you fast the days of Shawwal. Can you merge them? And the scholars differ on whether you can have one intention for both. But the more superior view is that if you have days owing, that's wajib, and that gets preference over days that are sunnah of Shawwal, right? So you should fast your days that are wajib first, and then fast the sunnah days thereafter. So the fasting must be made up before the new Ramadan. But now let's say that you did not do that. The new Ramadan is coming, and you haven't fasted your debt, you haven't made up those days. And the ulama, and I took the view of Shaykh Qardawi relating to this as well, particularly in the Shafi'i school, that it would then be best that firstly, you still owe those days, so you'll fast them after the new Ramadan, but because you did not fast them and the new Ramadan has come, you now pay fidya for each day that you owed. So if you didn't make up for 5 days, you owed 8, you fasted 3, you still owe 5, it's the new Ramadan, so you still owe that 5, and then now you'll pay fidya by times 5 for the 5 days that have been missed. Any questions, beloved brothers?
If Sheikh could go back to the previous slide, there's 2 questions I have. Many of our elderly, because of their taqwa and because of their fasting 40, 50, sometimes 60 years, they are on chronic medication which forces them to not fast. But as we all know, many of them, they force to fast. So I want to know, in this case, and if Sheikh doesn't want to answer it, then it's also fine. Will this fall into the category now of being sinful, or will you get of pushing through, basically, or will it fall under the category now of you being sinful because you are bringing harm upon yourself by forcing to fast?
Okay, so that's a very good question. The person has asked if a person has chronic, they have been diagnosed and they need to take chronic medication. Essentially, the medical ruling is they should not fast and they cannot fast. And we are talking also about a permanent condition, right? It's not that they could fast after Ramadan. So the person has asked if that elderly person forces the fast upon them. Now this is the operative area. If it is to the extent that they harm themselves, I'm not going to say that they will be punished, but Allah had already exempted them. So a very important area in fiqh is when Allah grants you a rukhsa, a permission to forego an obligation, some ulama have said it is even disrespectful by a believer to return that rukhsah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning, saying that Allah, you've given me off, but I don't want it. So some ulama have said it is disrespectful. So I'm not going to talk about the point of punishment and that it is sinful, but it is highly, highly encouraged to accept the condition that Allah had granted to that person, and of course to accept the mechanism that Allah had given, and that of course is the fidya.
And this is one more that I have. When one travels, even if it's a short distance from, for example, Port Elizabeth to Cape Town, you are exempt from fasting because of the distance and the length that you are staying there. I always took it as this is an opportunity for me to make amal and a sunnah that I wouldn't normally have an opportunity to make amal on. So therefore, if I travel, then I don't fast. To Sheikh's previous point now. So
should the person fast? So if the travel is facilitated,
would it be better to fast if the distance is short, or to not fast?
Yeah. So very good question that has been posed. If the travel is a short distance, you still a musafir, you are a traveler. The ruling applies to you. You can make qasr jam, etc. based on your madhab. And it is in the month of Ramadan. Should you break your fast because you are a traveler? The ulama have discussed this at length. And some, again, they are, I can't say there's even a stronger perspective here. Some say because Allah had, bil itlaq, across the board, said all travelers should not fast. Some ulama have said, then you shouldn't fast because your ruling is a traveler. And so some have also said, you can't be selective in the application of that I'm a traveler, so I'm going to shorten my salah, but I'm not going to take the other exception. You are taking the ruling of traveler. Another group of ulama have said, when we go into the definition of travel, we recognize that there's often haraj or difficulty in the travel. So if the person is traveling for very lengthy periods, and they feel tired, they feel it is challenging, then they shouldn't fast. And if a believer, so the main part here is if you are a traveler and there's difficulty, then you should definitely break your fast. If you are a traveler, whether there's difficulty or not, and you feel you want to practice upon that teaching, that position in fiqh, that you may, break your fast, then you may practice on that as well. And in both opinions, there's goodness, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala